Hello, everyone. My name is Amber, and today we're going to be talking all about starting before you are ready. So let's go. So, hi, my name is Amber Shand, and I am a perfectionist. So, this picture was actually taken back in 2018. This is when I was learning how to code through Code First Girls, and I realized just how much my perfectionism was holding me back. So, when I was like learning new concept like web development and Python, what was really stopping me from coding and like actually reaching my full potential was the fact that I wasn't going to get it right the first time. So it meant that I wasn't necessarily answering questions that they were asking. I didn't necessarily stretch myself that much because the fear of failure and the fear of just being just bad and not absolutely glowing straight away was holding me back to such a strong degree. So I want to start off by saying that there is a big difference between a healthy pursuit for excellence versus an unhealthy pursuit for perfection. And I used to think that perfectionism was a good thing. It meant that my standards were high, my work was good, but in reality, and Brene Brown describes it best as an unhealthy and addictive belief system that fuels this primary thought, which is if I look perfect and do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of blame, judgment, and shame. And when she said this, oh my goodness, couldn't believe it. She's coming for me directly. She might as well have come to my house, knocked on my door, and said, Amber, this is you. I couldn't believe it when I heard that because I didn't realize that that was the underlying thought patterns that were occurring that was stopping me. I just knew that I just could not write this code right now, or I was too anxious to necessarily answer this question. So, one thing that I want us all to embrace is that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And to realize that single step doesn't have to be necessarily perfect, it's just a step that drives us forward. So, I always say there is no right or wrong method to start before you're ready, but this is my personal right method. So, it's an acronym that stands for recognize, intervene, growth mindset, help, and track. So first, let's start with recognizing, and we're going to talk about thoughts, feelings, fears, and behaviors. So let's start off with three types of unhelpful thinking styles. So first of all, it's black and white thinking. So that can involve only seeing one extreme or the other, and there's no in between or any shades of gray. So it'd be me thinking things like, if I don't answer this question, it means that I'm a failure. It means that I'm so bad at coding. But the reality is that it means that I don't necessarily know this answer. Or how about I try and we'll see what goes on here. And even the mental filter. So I would focus so much on all the times that I didn't understand a new coding concept over like all the times I actually did. So a mental filter only looks at the negative parts of a situation and forgetting all the positive parts. And the reality was, because I was focusing so much on the negative parts, it kept me feeling stuck and it kept me feeling like I couldn't actually make the change as I was coming from an economics and accounting background. Learning how to code during the pandemic and in general was really, really tough. So focusing on all the negative parts was not helping me at all. And catastrophizing. One thing about me, you can call me the CEO of catastrophizing. And that basically means that you believe that you're in a worse situation than you really are, or exaggerating your difficulties. I literally felt like if I went to a coding interview and I wasn't able to make it out, that my heart would just beat so fast. It would eventually beat so fast that I would fail to exist anymore. Yes, that was definitely me. So it was first about addressing the thoughts that were negative and unhelpful thoughts that we're having, and then going on to those feelings. So personally, at least for me, when I was learning how to code and making that transition, I felt a lot of self-doubt. And the women and people that I mentor, they normally have this feeling as well. So can we really do it? And questioning our own abilities and competencies into actually being able to land that first software engineering role. And also the anxiety. Do you know, remember I said to you that I thought my heart was literally going to beat out of my chest and stop me from like just living. I used to have severe anxiety surrounding things like putting myself out there in terms of one, answering questions, two, put myself in a position where like I was coding and I broke something, and also to actually put myself out there and apply for jobs before I necessarily felt extremely like 100% okay and I've got this. And of course, overwhelming. I'm not sure if it's a set. When I was learning how to code, it was over the pandemic, and I'm not sure if you see the same long threads on Twitter, all the steps that you need to take before you can land your first role. It felt so long and absolutely impossible at the time. I was constantly faced with this feeling of being extremely overwhelmed. And now let's go on to our fears. So, of course, the fear of failure, which is something that people, like a lot of people experience. And something that isn't actually spoken about that much is the fear of success. And so that essentially means that, so for example, if you're going for your first software engineering role, your first tech job, it means that if you were to get that, you fear that you won't actually be good enough or align with the expectations. So you fear that if you do get it, you won't actually be able to basically meet expectations. The fear of feeling exposed, that was definitely me when it came to pair programming. Oh my goodness, pair programming, that literally made me shake, because I was like, the person on the other side now knows that I am bluffing my way through this and I don't necessarily know anything that I'm doing. The fear of judgment or criticism, again, that same kind of feeling, fear of like not being good enough. And that's how I felt like when I was applying for roles. I was just so scared that if I was to get rejected, it would actually just confirm my belief that I'm just clearly not good enough to land this new role. And the fear of the unknown. Of course, when you're stepping into a new career, it can be scary, and we don't actually, and we can look at TikToks, for example, and say day in the life of a software engineer. How realistic is that? I don't quite know. And from being a software engineer, sometimes not so much, but some days it is. And the fear of change, of course, like again, making a big change in terms of a new career, and the fear of wasted time and resources. I was just so scared about so my fears were, I was learning Ruby at one point. Don't ask. We don't talk about those times. But I was putting a long time into Ruby, and then I realized that it wasn't actually going to help me get to the destination in the path that I was planning to do it. So I was just so scared that, oh my gosh, I've wasted all this time. But the reality was, in the end, it actually helped me out. So we'll talk about that later as well. And then the behaviors. So, of course, procrastination. When we're feeling scared and overwhelmed, we can tend to procrastinate taking the actions that are actually going to serve us. So, in my case, I was definitely procrastinating when it came to one, actually doing my own learning outside of the courses, and also because I was overwhelmed of what to focus on. So, sometimes you think, oh, should I focus on JavaScript? Should I focus on Python? Should I focus on Ruby? And that was one of the main things that was actually leading to my procrastination. And of course, overthinking and overanalyzing. And it didn't help for that fact that there were so many different resources and so many different opinions and so many different ways to enter the tech industry. I couldn't help but overthink constantly, and that fed into my procrastination. And also blaming others. So this is different for different people. You may not necessarily do this, but I was definitely felt like at some points I'm just a victim of this pandemic, because it was very hard. It was a case of there was like 220 people or 1,000 people applying for roles where there's like 2 software engineering roles, and it's like it felt like there were just so many senior engineer roles available. Where are the junior engineer roles? And that just made me feel very, very upset and like, oh my gosh, this pandemic, can we just stop it? But don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. I felt like we're doing a bit doom and gloom here. This is part of the right methods is all about intervention, and we'll talk about building your intervention toolkit. But first, we have to talk about toxic positivity. And toxic positivity is actually what keeps us stuck. So toxic positivity is essentially where you don't feel like there's any room for you to feel any negative emotions. And people may say things like, with the greatest of intentions. So I remember I went to an interview and they're like, you'll be fine, don't worry about it. Yeah, that was all well and good. But the reality was it wasn't fine. I didn't pass it and it went badly. But it was all about focusing on my ability to actually bounce back from that. And we'll go into that as well later. But I just wanted to make sure that we got into toxic positivity, because that is something that we see a lot of. And the reality is it doesn't always go plain sailingly. So one example that I love to talk about is when I went to wakeboarding. So essentially me and my boyfriend were just like, you know what, let's do something fun, let's do something adventurous. Let's just start on let's start doing water sports. Don't know why. I just said yes. And so essentially wakeboarding is almost like so when you stand up, you're like water skiing, but like on your knees instead. So I had never done this before, but I thought, do you know what? Like, done all this work on myself, I'm going to feel the fear and do it anyway. I'm going to start before I'm ready. So I'm at the dock, I'm on the board now, and I'm holding on to this bar. And I know that the woman's going to push me off into the water, and I'm just going to hold onto the bar for dear life and just try to go around this like course. So I breathe in, she pushes me out onto the deck. I hold on, right? Didn't realize how fast it was. Didn't realize how much arm strength you had to have. So I literally think I lost 6 seconds. I let go of the bar. I go face forward into the water, right? I'm off the board. I'm below the water now. The person behind me is going full steam ahead. I think that they're going to run over me, and I'm literally seeing my death live. And then I start to envision the fact that I did sign a waiver saying I could swim, knowing full well that I couldn't necessarily swim that well. It was a whole experience of a time where I literally started before I felt ready, and it didn't necessarily go well or to plan. So that's something that we definitely need to talk about, the fact that it doesn't always go to plan. It's about your ability to bounce back. So I eventually got out of the water eventually, and I think, okay, that wasn't too bad. Obviously it was a bit traumatizing, feeling like I was going to drown, but essentially we recover. And then as I'm walking back to the dock, this guy is like, oh my gosh, I saw you before. Oh my gosh, it was so funny. Your scream literally filled the entire space. And I was like, can I not fail in peace in private? But it was actually good in the end, because it meant that I could laugh sooner than I was actually ready to laugh. So that was really nice. But I was just like, let a girl fail in peace and in private. But yeah, we had to talk about that first. So we're going to talk about a few mindset shifts that we can take, so that we can basically develop thinking styles that are actually helpful for us to get us towards our goals. So for example, sometimes we may think things like, there's so much to do and I don't know where to start. So remember before we were talking about feeling overwhelmed, and especially when you have that long to-do list of how we can get into the career field that we really want to, or whatever goals that we have, I challenge you to say, what is the smallest step that can bring me to my goal? And so that just may be, if you're doing web development, just starting off with HTML and CSS first before we move on to any fancy JavaScript or React and stuff like that. Or saying things like, I'm not doing anything with my life. Again, the whole black and white thinking thing. Definitely can be guilty of this, even to this day. Kimberly knows. But the reality is, it's like we are doing the best with the energy and resources that we have at this current time. And thinking things like, I don't know how. Remember, when it can be very overwhelming and there's so many different opinions, we may not know the best course of actions. But the reality is, we can learn how by seeking help and researching. So whenever it's a situation of, oh my gosh, everyone's saying different things, we can just align and speak to one person, find out what they did, and create a plan for ourselves from that. Another one is, if I fail, it means that I am a failure. I want you all to know that failure is not who you are. It's something that you experience. And also, if you're too scared to make the change, it means you can't do it. Take it from me. And when I was doing that wakeboarding, knowing full well I couldn't swim, we can say to ourselves, the step I'm about to take scares me, and I can feel the fear and do it anyway. Another thing is, especially when you learn how to code, you may feel so alone working on this project or whatever your goal is that you want to take. And the great thing is, codebar is an amazing community, and we can say things like, I can look into communities to support because I feel lonely. I heavily relied on codebar workshops during the pandemic. It really helps me out with, one, my coding, and two, feeling connected with other people. It was a great networking opportunity, and it gave me a safe space to actually ask those questions and be what I felt was vulnerable, because I felt like I didn't know anything. And being very anxious and sharing my screen, it actually created a safe space for me to learn and eventually thrive. So there's short-term and long-term interventions that we can add to our intervention toolkit. So short-term things like, okay, I'm feeling very overwhelmed right now, I'm scrolling on Twitter, close the app, take an intentional break. And sometimes we can just go outside into nature or go to a safe space. So I always say that sometimes when I'm overthinking, it feels like my problems can fill up the whole space that I'm in, especially when I'm inside. So I like to go outside into nature, because then it doesn't feel like my problems can fill up this whole world, which is so, so helpful. Some people choose to write it down, they can exercise, do some kind of meditation, definitely practicing self-compassion. And that's something that I wish that I could go back to my like 2020, 2018 self and just say like, it's okay, and just practicing a lot more self-compassion, especially as a perfectionist. Like if any of you are perfectionists in the room, you can understand how hard we can be on ourselves because our standards are so incredibly high that nothing actually tends to really reach them. And also feeling immensely gratitude, like that feeling of I'm so grateful even that codebar exists, and the fact that I can just go to this workshop and ask someone for help, and they're able to answer my question or point me into the direction of some resources or someone else that can help me out as well. And then some long-term solutions, such as seeking professional help, maybe through a therapist, investing in a course like Mind Valley, that's meant to be really good for personal development, working on your mindset, reading self-help books, but even just any book that you like. I've actually been looking into some fictional books because I read a lot of just like non-fictional books. So if you have any recommendations for some fictional books, do let me know, because I'm trying to add some more to my reading list. And creating positive habits like gratitude, self-care, again, like as I spoke about before, self-compassion, and doing activities that increase your self-esteem. Of course, the wakeboarding is a very bad example of something that would increase my self-esteem. But yeah, these are just some ideas of what you can do when you're recognizing how you feel and you need to intervene in that moment. So I would love to hear, I've got the chat open now. What are you adding to your intervention toolkit? Oh, sorry, Robbie. I'm sorry. Ruby is good. It's good, I promise. Kimberly says walking the dog. Love that. Okay, cool. Pauline says talk it out with a friend. That is such a good one. Anna says getting outside. Nas says trying to meditate. Love that. Becky says coffee with friends. That is a good one. I'm gonna add that to my list. Susie says there's some lines down the road from us, so we visit them. Where do you live? That sounds exciting. I might have to go there to visit some lines. Diana is very creative, asking ChatGPT for advice. I love that for you. I really do. Jules says going to a cat cafe. Oh my gosh, genius. Genius. Yes. Catch me at a cat cafe. I'm actually going to add that to the slides for the next one because that is so on brand for me. So thank you for thank you for helping me add that to my intervention toolkit, because that's a really cool one. Okay, we'll move on now. So let's talk about a growth mindset in our right method. So a growth mindset is the belief that you can develop your skills and talents through hard work, the right strategies, and guidance from others. So people with a growth mindset actually see obstacles as opportunities. So in my case, when I was actually learning how to build my mindset to make me stronger, to apply for new roles, I actually decided to see every failed experience. So whenever I had a bad interview or I didn't pass a problem, how can I use that as ways to drive me forward and as opportunities to grow? So in the case of coding, coding is a great example of a guidance of how to build a growth mindset, because literally errors point you towards how to get to the solution. Can't say it any better than that. But also when it comes to failing job interviews, oh my gosh, this happened obviously a lot. I actually started before I was ready. So it meant that I was putting myself out there to situations where I was at interviews and I may not have known the answers to questions, or may have gotten some questions wrong. I was a bit shaky with some of the answers. But what I did was I actually wrote down all the questions, so it made me stronger for my next one. And because I didn't do any formal kind of boot camp, I did a part-time one, it meant that I can streamline my learning into understanding what people actually wanted. So for example, I did not think that the terminal was a real thing. Like I just thought that it was just part of the courses and it was a nice to have rather than something that devs actually used. So I recall a moment where in an interview when they asked me, can you name me a few Git commands? And I was just like, I don't have the answer. And then from that moment, I realized that the terminal and Git were very real things I needed to add to my learning. So I came up with a bit of a list of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So people with a growth mindset embrace opportunities. They're normally resilient when faced with setbacks. So they normally use their setbacks as ways to drive themselves forward and as learning opportunities. And they normally welcome constructive criticism. They're inspired by the success of others and view effort as path to success. Whereas people with fixed mindset, and I want to make it absolutely clear, there's no like, it's not bad if you currently may have a fixed mindset. I've definitely had a fixed mindset and still continue to struggle with having that mindset sometimes. It's all a learning lesson. Like it's all part of our learning. And I'd really encourage you to have and practice some self-compassion if you do find yourself having this fixed mindset. But people with fixed mindset tend to avoid challenges that may lead to failure or discomfort. They may take failures personally. They view receiving feedback as an attack and believe abilities are fixed and they cannot change or improve significantly. And something that I was reading about today, actually, about having a fixed mindset, was it can be so subtle. So you can say stuff like, "Oh, I'm really good at Python," and that could be absolutely true. But the reality is, the reason why that seems to be a fixed mindset is because we could actually be good at anything, but it's because we happen to put a lot of effort and time into Python, which makes us good at it, rather than us like waking up one day and somehow we can just do all these for loops in Python, for example, and just run this whole like backend server through Python. So yeah. And H for help in the right method. So achieving your goals can only be lonely if you're doing it alone. I always say lean into community. So the power of community. Codebar, love you guys. Absolutely iconic. If the fact that you're all part of codebar, you are just so lucky to be in a space. Honestly, whenever someone is having trouble with learning how to code, feeling isolated in tech space, I always say go to codebar because they have the most amazing events, the festival. Kimberly, you're absolutely a legend. And there are also other communities I'm part of, like Code First Girls, Coding Black Females, Girl Dreamer, the Stack World, Babes and Waves, and Triangles. And community doesn't have to necessarily just lean into tech. Like, for example, Girl Dreamer, Stack World, and Babes and Waves, they're actually like just communities that have women that are into like personal development and stuff like that. So I definitely lean into community because I hate feeling alone. And it's really nice to connect with other people who may be on a similar path to you, who can guide you, you can help them. And so yeah, it's really, really nice to feel like you're part of something because that makes a big difference. At the end of the day, if you're doing something challenging like career changing, you can feel isolated, but there are so many people that you can connect with who are going through something similar to you that you can have as accountability partners and can lean in and check in on each other. And it's just so, so nice. And the final part of the right method is to track your wins. If you take anything from this talk, please track your wins. It will make such a big difference. 3 tips on how to track your wins. Number 1, don't discount the small wins. They definitely matter. I used to have a daily journal where in the pandemic, I would write down all the stuff that I was doing. Because remember, I don't know if you remember this, during the pandemic, it felt like time was just like kind of like waved into each other. Like it was very, very odd time. So sometimes my win for the day was the fact that I made myself breakfast today. Or sometimes it was the fact that I went to a code bar workshop, or sometimes it was that I went to a talk, or that I learned how to use for loops in Python, for example. Second of all, have a visual aid. So at the moment, I have a visual aid. I have it through pictures. So whenever I actually feel like I'm actually not doing anything in my life, I'm very confused about how I spend my time. I'll just go through my pictures and I'll be like, okay, I actually am doing stuff, which is really, really helpful. So sometimes people like to have a visual aid in terms of pictures. They may have a spreadsheet to track their wins. But yeah, 3 is having a system. So setting up a monthly or weekly weekly wins tracker that you check in on. So I check in on my wins every month at the end because I normally have a reflection of my month, just see how my month went, how I felt, and just checking in on myself. But yeah, definitely set up one of those systems because it will make a big difference when you're on the path to achieving what you actually set out to achieve. So yeah, that is my rights method: recognizing, intervening, the growth mindset, help, and track. So thank you all so much for listening.